All right, welcome back to the Beyond Coaching podcast. Today we've got Coach Jim Rutter, head coach and owner of Philadelphia Barbell Club in the Port Richmond section of Philly. He's been in the sport since the early 2000s, first as a national level lifter and then as a coach who's produced more than 30 national medalists since 2017. He's known not just for building strong teams, but for how he thinks, deep into sports psychology, mindset, and how things like perfectionism, feedback, and framing success actually show up on the platform. Jim spent the last few years studying the research and turning it into a book called Keep Fighting, specifically for weightlifters and strength athletes, focused on moving lifters from error-obsessed to future-focused, from threat state to true challenge state. We're going to dig into his journey, how he builds and leads his club, what he's learned about coaching the mind as much as the body, and how coaches can bring this into their own gyms and teams. Jim, thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. So you found Olympic weightlifting watching it on ESPN2 at the bar. What grabbed your attention?
Well, I played college football, and then in 2000, I happened to be at a bar with friends, and it was during the summer Olympic season. Growing up, we'd always just focused on like track and field or gymnastics or diving, and the sports that were very prominent in this country. And I saw this come on TV, and I'm like, wait a minute, the weightlifting is an Olympic sport? I had no idea. And I thought, well, all right, I need a new sport. I'm done playing college football. So I was like, I want to get into that. And it found a coach and took off from there.
Nice.
That's awesome.
How did you find a coach? Did you just like...
Well, look, this was 2000. It was pre-Google. I think I was like, Yahoo search existed then. And I just, it was trial and error. I just had reached out to a lot of people who, some of whom got back to me. And I wound up finding a coach. I was living in Westchester, Pennsylvania at the time. And the closest coach was Frank Bisaccia in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. So it was like an hour plus drive each way. Originally what I did was I don't even think Amazon existed yet. So I went to half.com and I bought a book on weightlifting written by a college teacher in Texas. And I tried to teach myself. And after dropping the bar on my head a few times, I was like, I need to find a coach.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Was that book written by Terry Todd?
That's a great question. I would have to really dig it out of my library. Yeah.
Cool. Nice.
So you described a moment in 2018 when like an athlete turned to you in fear before a big lift. What did that moment teach you?
So we were at a 2018 series meet that happened to be in Valley Forge that year. So basically a local meet for us. And it was a lifter I'd been coaching for almost 4 years. And she was a lightweight female getting ready to open at 100 kilos in the clean and jerk for the first time. And we had rehearsed it in training and we'd planned for it. And they called her name and she turned to me with a look of terror on her face. And she was just like, please tell me I can do this. And what it taught me, it caught me off guard because she had already medaled twice at senior nationals. And she had crushed that lift in complexes, multiple singles in training in the cycle leading up to the meet. And I thought, all right, there's something I need to add to my coaching repertoire that will help me either get ahead of or help manage these situations when they arise. I remember that, I told her something and she went out, she did make the lift, but it just cost her a little more psychological energy than it might have otherwise. And that led me to start reading books on mindset. And then that process really got underway about 5 years ago after I'd published my second book and started working on this one.
Yeah. What do you think about mindset? Like, what do you think people kind of get right and get wrong in general?
Well, one thing that I think is the research has started to really get right is to understand how our mental states connect with our physiology. So one of the model on which I based this book is called A Theory of Challenge and Threat States in Athletes. And it was a paper published in 2009, which is now considered seminal. There's been over 600 follow-up papers on it that have explored it, produced a lot of research. And the theory of challenge and threat states, so the way I would best understand theory is the same way biologists talk about it when they say the theory of evolution. What it really means is we're just presenting a model for understanding something. So like the model of challenge and threat. So challenge and threat states are distinct physiological states that consist of cardioreactive patterns to stress. Now, they also include the release of hormones, brain activation, and things that affect your breathing, such as what's called total peripheral resistance, which is vasoconstriction in the extremities, which for athletes, that leads to a feeling of clunkiness or heaviness in the legs, or all of a sudden my singlet's starting to feel tight. All of these things result from your physiology, and then how you perceive them is where the mindset comes in. So the theory of challenge and threat basically asks a simple question, which is, if I'm facing a heavy snatch, heavy clean and jerk in competition, the appraisal that occurs is, do my personal resources meet or exceed the demands of the situation? And your answer to that stress appraisal is going to affect your physiology and ultimately affect how you perform on the platform. And while the authors of the main research note that that process is sometimes as directly cognitive as I made it sound, a lot of times it happens just like sub or unconsciously as well. But it can be those resources that an athlete brings to a competition or to a heavy training day or just a day-to-day life, they can be developed and shaped and then like channeled and harnessed in competitive situations that matter. The thing I like about it the most is that it directly connects an athlete's mental states with how their physiology operates in situations requiring peak or elevated performance.
Yeah.
And that's why I found it to be so useful, because it's again, the model of challenge and threat has been studied extensively in a number of contexts, including education, the military, in medicine. Like, for instance, when surgeons show up in a challenged state, they are more precise, their decisions flow more automatically, they exhibit better standards of practice and patient care. And the same thing in like on the battlefield or in engineering or education or law or even in sales negotiations. These are distinct physiological states. And in 2009, they were applied to athletes and sports performance for the first time. And now, 16 years later, we have a mountain of evidence that shows that athletes who are able to enter the physiology of a challenged state perform better. So that's what my book unpacks and explains, and then builds processes that athletes and coaches can use to get themselves into that state on game day.
So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like people's psychological, like the way it's when someone perceives their physical abilities will match the demand ahead of them.
Yes, it's entirely about that self-appraisal. And
Right. And
also, sorry, go ahead.
no, I'll say so if they don't feel that, if they feel like it makes sense, right? If this weight's too heavy for me to lift, I don't think I can lift it, then, or I don't think I'm physically able to lift it. That's like when they're in this state of like, it's negative. It's not going to be a good scenario. But if they can do the other way, where they feel that they are ready to lift this weight, the question I was going to ask is maybe not specifics, but like what, does this shape how you would prepare someone the last few weeks into competition to sort of help them make the psychological connection between I am ready and I believe I'm ready, therefore I am in this state, versus like doing something different? Like, so for example, would you have them like lift really heavy weights close to competition that they then feel like ready because they feel like, oh, I've done this before, versus like not touching heavy weights and like, well, just trust it, you're going to peak at the meet?
Ah,
Like,
yes.
I'm kind of asking that
Yeah.
question. Like, what do you do, I guess, to sort of facilitate getting them to that point?
Okay. So I'll give you one quick strategy. So I get them to focus primarily on what are called approach goals. So in an athlete's understanding of the situation, they have three resources that they can see as making up their ability to perform the task in front of them. Achievement goals are what matters in terms of execution. So in my coaching practice, I actively encourage athletes to only focus on the adjustment going forward. For instance, I stop telling them about whatever error they might have made. That's number one. Focusing on errors and error avoidance in particular is one of the surest ways to put an athlete into a threat state. So if they miss a lift, I will explain to them what they need to do on the next attempt. If they make a lift, I will try to construct my feedback in a manner that encourage them to accentuate or better perceive their ability to perform it again. For instance, if they make a clean that was a little shaky at, say, 95%, but it was the day after like a heavy single back squat, I'll say, look, that clean shows what you can do under fatigue.
Right.
And there's a reason for this, and that's the three primary resources that direct an athlete into a challenge state. The approach goals are one, the sense of control, which is an athlete's conscious or otherwise decision to only focus on factors that they can influence the outcome of. Like, for instance, stop worrying about the judges, instead focus on your tension or your pacing or your breathing or your self-talk. And then the first and the most prominent one related to sports performance is a concept called self-efficacy, which is basically the athlete's belief that they can perform the specific task in front of them. Now, in our sport, that's snatch, clean, or jerk. So in terms of building that self-efficacy, one of the most salient points that the literature shows is that unless you reflect productively on your made reps, your brain stops storing them as evidence for the future attempts.
Hmm.
And I read that. That's from like a 2001 paper by Deborah Feltz. She's a researcher at University of Michigan. And I read that and I was like, oh man, all those athletes I coach who, and you know this too, Max, you coach as well. Athletes get done, they make a lift, and even though it was a solid, would have gotten 3 white lights or even 2, they just find ways to shit all over it.
Yeah.
So you understand that dynamic. And in training, again, I will tell the athletes, hey, look, we got to meet in 6 weeks. You need to shift gears. We're moving away from technical refinements is probably the closest word I want, but we're moving towards now execution. And that execution requires you to change one specific habit, and it's how you respond to your made or missed reps in training. Because you have to start getting your brain to store them as evidence for future lifts. Now, I'll put it a little less directly sometimes, depending upon, the athlete, like for instance, actual age, or like college education, like a lifter I coach, Chris Camenieres, he's been through a PhD program. He has a great adult job, and I can explain things to him in a very technical sense, and he grasps it. Somebody else who might be, say, a college student getting ready for finals, I might put it in more simplified terms, but basically the understanding is that if you can learn to adjust your habits, you're going to set yourself up for future success. And the habits are very specific.
I like that.
That's awesome. I know, you mentioned the highest compliment you used to give a lifter was not bad.
Yeah. I've moved far, far away from that. But I'll tell you in a second. So when I first started, and this was an influence, my father was a coach as well, basketball and golf. And I think the number one thing I ever heard growing up was not bad. Whether that was in relation to my grades or my success in high school football or high school track. And then the second number one comment that I used to give to lifters was, well, that was almost okay. And you've been there, Max. You understand. I mean, we're pretty gruff guys. Yeah, but like, how to put this? We can find more effective ways of talking to our athletes. We can help them develop the resources in training that will, on game day, put them in a challenge state or make it more likely to occur. Even in meets where they feel less than or underprepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool to me to hear this two things is like, one, actually like clarifying like, I guess what I would describe as what is psychological readidness kind of. It sounds like it's the proximity of these two things, right? Like how ready I feel, how capable I feel of executing the task and how close that is to the task itself, right? Like if I think I can snatch 100 kilos and I have total confidence in it, then I'm very ready for 100. Right. But if I have zero confidence in, or I'm afraid of, or I don't think I can snatch 102, like that's the other way around. Right. And it seems silly, but it's that's very oversimplifying it. But the second thing is what you're talking about is this idea of almost like, I don't know how to describe it. Like what you're saying is continually reflecting on positive experiences or positive lifts as a way of essentially like reinforcing or storing that in your memory as an athlete is something very different than I know of the athlete who will do a lift that's perfect and they'll walk off the stage and be like, yeah, but my shoes were tied too tight. Whatever it
Yeah.
is, doesn't matter. And it's like, it is interesting to think that as a method and as a general practice, it makes a lot of sense to probably be having people sit down a lot more and ingest and reflect on the quality of the lifts and the good lifts and the wins. Even if for no other reason, then why would you not focus on wins and the positive elements of it? But now it
Yeah.
seems like it actually is like the evidence to show this is a better practice than trying to be a perfectionist and like, well, yeah, you could have, that was good, but you could do this, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The evidence is overwhelming.
Right.
And it was a real learning curve for me as both a coach and as a researcher, and translating this into actionable strategies. And to just kind of bridge all the points you're making, I do include a chapter in my book that's called "The Negative," in quotes, is sometimes necessary. And there are very specific instances in an athlete's journey where they will want to understand what they're doing in what we would traditionally call negative terms. Like, for instance, at the start of a training block, there's a lot of research that suggests that strategic self-doubt in that initial appraisal of what you want to get moving towards your next meet will help you perform better going forward. Like, for instance, if you say to yourself, okay, let's look at the last meet and the results I achieved. Where were those areas where maybe I slacked off a little bit? For instance, there's a couple days where I skipped my prehab and it made it so that the squats were harder over the next 2 weeks. Or those 3 nights that I went out and got slammed with my friends, that did actually make my cut a little tougher. And I identify about 6 scenarios that the research suggests will, through negative understandings of what you've been doing, lead you to better outcomes in terms of how well you direct your resources and energy in training, in terms of how well you are going to, say, address a persistent technical issue. Because we know this too in our sport, Max. Athletes can get away with technical errors through either strength or speed, or in some cases, you've seen this through courage or just innate
Yeah.
aggression. Strategic self-doubt can help an athlete build even on top of those already good qualities.
Right.
Yeah. And so I do try, at least in terms of the language in the book, to move away from a positive negative dichotomy and towards one that just suggests, look, you have productive methods and unproductive methods. Negative self-talk, 9 times out of 10, is unproductive. Those cases where it can spur you to greater effort, like, for instance, I coach an athlete. She ran track and field in college, transitioned over to weightlifting, and every once in a while, she will miss a rep at about 80%, and then she'll call those her asshole reps because she needs to stop being an asshole and focus a little more, or put a little more into her setup or into how quickly she pulls the bar into the overhead position.
Right.
That's a great example of when what traditionally we would understand as negative self-talk can function productively to spur greater effort on the next attempt. Similarly, harnessing frustration, I devote a whole chapter to that with a really vivid example from an athlete that I observed firsthand at World University Championships. And there's the great thing about frustration, even though most of us understand it negatively, is that it activates regions in the brain that are designed to push us towards reward-seeking behavior. The key is, how do you harness it? And so untangling that research and creating actionable steps that an athlete could use in a competition or heavy training situation, that's part of the book as well.
Nice.
When
Yeah,
it comes to balancing accountability and empathy, like when an athlete underperforms on meet day, how do you put that into practice?
that's another great question. Yeah, so I think it would depend on the nature of the underperformance. Again, within my own coaching practice, one of the things I've tried to do is I try to get athletes to set goals for each meet, only some of which directly connect to performance. For instance, the outcome, snatch, clean jerk, placement, podium position, team spots, etc. I think that, there's a notion within sports psychology, well, within motivational psychology in general, that's called goal congruence. And it's, what is the likelihood that I can achieve this goal? If you're, say, 10 kilos down from your best training total on what an international team spot would require, the goal congruence is moderate. However, you can also set a goal that is, I will go out there and attack every rep with courage, or I will maintain my focus independently of whatever my competitors do, or I will show up and put all my effort into 3 solid attempts at the clean and jerk. Those types of goals, and so there were 2 main longitudinal studies that I used to talk about these topics in the book. One was a study on 328 athletes who had participated in the Olympics across about 14 different sports. And it was about goal setting and what helped them best perform in training and practice, stick to the long grind in between, of the quad, and then perform at their best on game day. And of the top 3 goals that athletes listed as helping them, number 1 was process goals, plain and simple. I need to improve this element of my sport, whether in swimming, if that was I need to have a faster kick turnaround at the wall on my 100-meter freestyle, or in weightlifting, I need to solidify my lockout in the jerk or the snatch. Number 2 were goals related to how they comported themselves in the actual competition. And then surprisingly, the third goal was have fun. And the process goals the authors explain pretty well is that from an Olympian standpoint, if you're an Olympic sport, your main event comes once every 4 years. In the interim, you would better find a lot of ways by which you can adjudicate a sense of progress. And so that stood out to me as well. And then there was a second study that was on, they studied 32 UK, classified as elite versus super elite. And the super elite athletes were those who had medaled at either the Olympics or their respective world championships, whereas the elite athletes were those who had gone to and maybe medaled at those second-tier international competitions like the Commonwealth Games, for example. And so they found that one of the main differentiators between the elite and the super elite was the amount of focus they put into everyday training. And so I think that kind of answers your question as to how you can handle someone who maybe underperforms. Number 1 strategy would be, well, you need to first set goals that have a high likelihood of achievement. For instance, you can have the big goal. And I totally understand in the sport, we win or lose by a kilogram in a total. So the big goal is the total. But then secondarily, you can set goals, for instance, how do I want to act if somebody steals my clock? How do I want to harness frustration? How can I, if I've been working on being more present during competition attempts, and that's 2 whole chapters of the book about focus and how to kind of create that in both training and competition. And the anecdote / story that I use is a pretty surprising one where an athlete completely lost focus by being on their phone in between their second and third attempts. An athlete from another club. I barely allow people to use their phones in my gym. I think I lost my thread a little bit. But in addition to having those goals in competition, you need to set goals that motivate you in training as well.
It's like subjective. Like, are you talking like subjective? Because it sounds like to me you almost have like you have a layer of objective goals of like, yeah, this is the output, this is what we're gonna do.
Yes.
But then you have objective goals of like, did I show up to be the best version of me on this day, and defining what that means.
Yes, and I would think that the literature on successful athletes bears that out. And again, it will be, as far as that 328 Olympian study went, the number 1 goal is about processes, improving specific aspects of their sport. The turnaround at the wall, the lockout and the jerk. Secondarily was goals related to competition, and then third, of course, have fun. But below that was that level of people who said the number 1 thing that motivates me is winning, my performance, etc. So all of it does matter. And a successful athlete is going to integrate those qualities and those objectives into their training and focus for competition. Because, again, if you're going back to the whole model of challenge and threat, we'll just take a simple example that everybody understands. You know, an athlete who shows up and either says to her teammates or to her friends or family members, well, I just don't want to embarrass myself. And we've all coached that athlete. And those are great kids to work with because they really do care about how they do. And yet that kind of goal is one of the surest ways to dampen down your physiological readiness at a meet.
Nice.
It's almost like it sounds like to me too, one of the key concepts here is rather than solving for mistakes, we're solving for success or progress. So like even in
Yes.
like in business or whatever we're doing, if we're constantly trying to figure out like the if thens, like if I do this, then this might happen or this bad thing could happen. We're almost like people are too like it's like a scarcity mindset versus abundance versus having the
Yes.
mindset of I'm going to
Yeah.
give this a go and be okay with the result, whichever way it may end, right?
Yes. And I would want to add to that and say that the model is something different than just having a pure, that what's that they call it? Toxic positivity now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's something very different than that. It's an appraisal grounded in what you do every day in training or in competition. It's in terms of it confronts the evidence head on and says, look, you can evaluate it this way and perform well, or you can evaluate it by calling yourself an idiot after a mismatch, or by getting done a good lift and saying, oh, but I forgot to do this, or this part of it stunk, you know? And those are unproductive and they lead to poor outcomes over time. And in the worst case, I point this out in two chapters distinctly, is that athletes, the research also shows that athletes who engage in what's called perseverating, which is like an obsessive focus on mistakes or failures, they drive themselves out of the sport. And hence the title of the book, Keep Fighting. You need to give yourself the habits that are shown to work, the beliefs that are shown to work in order to stay in the sport, achieve your goals, and in the best sense, maybe also feel good about yourself while you're doing it.
It's really interesting because it's like it seems like, yeah, it's not just a game of like this toxic positivity, right? It's not just a game of like always be positive.
Yes.
It's really like a sort of walking a fine line of like of this moderation is the wrong word, but like being on the track, the right path of managing the way you're thinking about what you're doing. Right?
Yes.
It's like it's very easy to fall to extremes, all good, all bad. But this sounds to me like it's a lot more about like instead of focusing on being all good or all bad, focus on the task at hand and the way you can improve at that task. Like example, is like in training, like is the process, are you refining the process of your routine before you lift the bar? Are you
Yes.
refining and working on like, am I breathing and bracing every time on the squat the same way? And it's not a matter of yes, I did or no, I didn't. It's can I improve the process of how I approach, my bracing setup? Am I refining this? Am I working at the process? Because the execution of these things is actually probably pretty low, not low priority, but it's like it's going to happen or it's not. You're either going to make the lift or miss the lift. And the thing that lends itself to a higher percentage chance of you or higher likelihood of you being successful is the things that you do on the way to execution, which is the process, right? So
Yes, that is correct.
it's funny that it's like it's so much more of like this being in the middle and like don't get extreme on one side or the other and be leaning towards the improving yourself on a regular basis and improving what you're doing day to day versus did we hit the outcome? Did we actually, did I get stronger today? Did I win the Olympics today? Like, no.
Yeah.
So it's like every day should be about like, what are the things I need to do to build the capacity and capability to win the Olympics? Am I working on the things that will facilitate those existing? Not do I have those things? Okay, now I have to get them. I have to make my squat go up 10 kilos or make my,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. It's process orientation, but it's like the way you're describing it is very, it feels like there's a lot of nuance to doing this well versus doing this, very poorly.
I would agree in large. Nuance, I would replace with deliberate habit,
Right.
if that makes sense. Like again, I think that the whole understanding we should push towards is that success leaves clues. And for
Right.
instance, in this in the study of 328 Olympians, they left behind a lot of clues for us to follow.
Right.
And I'll just give you two examples that kind of actually amplify this polarity of walking down the middle that you're describing. Is that so? If you're truly if you're in a challenge state in competition, it is because of a lot of that work you've already done. And one of the big benefits is that there is less what psychologists call reinvestment, meaning that you are operating automatically. Whether you want to call that a flow state, or you just want to say, hey, I was lifting, it felt like the bar didn't weigh like a stick today. You know what I mean? We've all felt that. I know that you've felt that in your training. You set up on the bar and it just starts lifting off the floor before you even begun to push with your feet. That is a quality, measurable quality called a reinvestment. And in a challenge state, you engage that less. If you're in a threat state, those are the athletes who are like step by step directing consciously what they're trying to do with the barbell. I'm holding it here and, oh, okay, think, buddy, come on, breathe, and etc. And in a challenge state, automaticity takes over because the physiology aligns for that kind of performance. Now, just to balance it on the other side, in the study of those 16 super elite versus 16 elite athletes, one of the surprising findings for the researchers and for me reading it was that to a person, all the 16 super elite athletes engaged in the process of what is called counterphobia, where they tried to imagine the things that could go wrong and then plan to deal with them in training. Now, I'm just going to set this up as a difference. There's what's called counterphobia, which is actionable and productive, and then catastrophizing, which is imagining all those horrible things happening and feeling paralyzed by it. Counterphobia is an actionable process by which you can say, okay, this could happen, and I can confront it directly and prepare myself for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's when I and sometimes I hate to talk like this, but when I say chapter in the book, like some of the chapters are as short as a single page. There is a single page on how to use counterphobia productively in the book, because
Right.
it is, if it's a strategy that people who are medaling at the Olympics are using to improve their performance, it's worth looking into for athletes in our sport. At one point, I do talk about how this all kind of connects around James Clear's 1% rule.
Mm.
And, you're right, Max. Every little thing you do makes a difference. And the athletes who invest and attune themselves to those processes tend to have better outcomes as well.
So with the book, is it a book that both you think lifters and coaches should read?
Yes, I wrote it primarily for athletes because my approach was as follows. A lot of the books that I read in those years from 2018 to say 2022, 23, they were very anecdote driven. And you've seen this. So-and-so sports psychologist helped this athlete improve his 3-point shot. Like, for instance, Bob Rotella helping LeBron James get better at 3 points. I wanted to present the athletes with step-by-step instructions on what they can do in training. And I used anecdotes where necessary to illustrate those processes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what are some things, so if there's a coach listening to this that they want to sort of take a look at their habits and how they speak to their athletes, what's the short list of action items that they should change, potentially right away?
Well, many of the chapters also include a coach's box where I do give those instructions. For instance, one of the most central chapters for a coach is that the model of challenge and threat states points out specific areas where the coach actually functions as a resource in competition. So there are strategies that a coach can use. For instance, keeping their cues simple. That's one we all understand. But there's other ones as well that ground how you give feedback in the psychological literature. For instance, rather than getting the athlete to even think about what happened in a missed lift. Get them just to focus on what the adjustment they need to make going into the next attempt. So there's coaches, I would think I wrote it primarily for athletes. And then when it became important or very applicable, I gave shout outs to coaches for what they can help with as well. And I think that any coach would benefit from reading this book. It just, if anything, my own journey, I guess, suggests that the way I talk to my athletes is very different now. The way I help them in competitions is very different now. The way I try to personalize even things like routines, like pre-lift routines, very different.
When do I get to berate my athletes and tell them they're bad people? When do I
Yeah,
don't want to,
great.
that's why I'm
No.
coaching. I
Yeah,
can't do that.
no.
Why am I coaching?
Yes, of course. There's a chapter on dedication, and it starts with a chart that says, look, if you want to be an athlete at this level, these are the things you need to do week in and week out. And
Right.
so if an athlete comes to you and says, hey, I want to qualify for the A session at my respective national championships, and they are doing X, Y, and Z when they should be doing A, B, C, and D, then you have both legitimacy and leverage to let them know, hey, buddy, you said you wanted this. Is this true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have Jim's permission. Jim said I could tell you you're garbage. Jim told me.
Yes.
He gave me
Yeah.
permission to tell you you're garbage.
Yeah. I would maybe keep the pejorative comments to a minimum, but sure. Yeah.
I'll just be sure to throw your name in there every time.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. As long as you know, as long as you've read the book, I'll be
Yeah.
happy about it. Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, we're excited to read it. I mean, we'll definitely take a look. If you're listening to this episode, it should be up on Amazon now by the time this guy gets out in a couple weeks here. So we're excited to read it, give it a go, and then we appreciate you having you on and just sharing your insights.
I
Is it-
appreciate being on.
Is
This
it
has been great.
available in digital and in print?
In maybe about a week, I'll have a Kindle version ready.
Okay, but it is a physical book.
There's some different formatting that has to take place, especially via the endnotes that will go into the Kindle edition. I wanted to make sure that the print edition was available going
Awesome.
forward.
Exciting.
Thank you, guys. This has been
Yeah, thank
excellent.
you. That was great.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.